In this part, number 12 of Gog and Magog, we are going to focus on the points that we saw in the previous conference. We will not enter all of them, but we will see the most significant ones. And once more, they are going to help us confirm what did Ellen White say and what did the Adventist pioneers say concerning Gog and Magog. But careful, because it is not only about what they believed in, but they refer to also what others believed in, like the Jews. Interesting, and even more interesting in the next conference. We will start looking at the most significant sections that I showed you in the last conference. See that we will talk about the sections that are marked inside the yellow box, all of them concerning Gog and Magog. As you can see, it mentions the same thing in different places, so we will only choose one of them. And we will start by this one, a word to the little flock, page 12, paragraph 1. Ellen White writes something, and she is doing it to the brother Eli Curtis. Topsham, April 21st, 1847. To brother Eli Curtis, New York City. Dear brother, in the Day Dawn, Volume 1, Numbers 10 and 11, you kindly invite me to address you a communication. The only apology I have to offer for not writing before is I have not had a clear duty to write till now. You will, I doubt not, excuse me for addressing you so publicly at this time. I have been much interested in your writings in the Dawn and Extra, and fully agree with you on some points, but on others we widely differ. Let's see, where were they in disagreement? Your Extra is now on the stand before me, and I beg leave to state to you and the scattered flock of God what I have seen in vision relative to these things on which you have written. I fully agree with you that there will be two literal resurrections, 1,000 years apart. Know that Ellen White, apart from showing what is in the Bible, she also, thanks to God, had visions, and in those visions many things are put on a firm footing. And here what is she saying? That there will be two literal resurrections, with 1,000 years between them, one of them at the end of the 6,000 years of sin, and the other one 1,000 years after, meaning after the millennium. I also agree with you that the new heavens and the new earth, she quotes Revelation 21 verse 1, Isaiah 65:17, and 2 Peter 3:13, will not appear till after the wicked dead are raised and destroyed, at the end of the 1,000 years. I saw that Satan was loosed out of his prison at the end of the 1,000 years, just at the time the wicked dead were raised, and that Satan deceived them by making them believe that they could take the holy city from the saints. The wicked all marched up around the camp of the saints, with Satan at their head, and when they were ready to make an effort to take the city, the Almighty breathed from his high throne on the city a breath of devouring fire, which came down on them and burnt them up, root and branch. And now the part where she quotes Gog and Magog. And I saw that as Christ is the vine, and his children the branches, so Satan is the root, and his children are the branches. And at the final destruction of Gog and Magog, the whole wicked host will be burnt up, root and branch, and cease to exist. Then will appear the new heaven and the new earth. Then will the saints build houses and plant vineyards. I saw that all the righteous dead were raised by the voice of the Son of God at the first resurrection, and all that were raised at the second resurrection were burnt up and ceased to exist. So this situates us, right? She talks of Gog and Magog, referring to the final destruction of Satan and his angels and the resurrected wicked. They attack the New Jerusalem, and then is when God descends this fire that burns them up, and essentially they cease to exist, all of them, root and branch. that is Satan and all of the rest. Well, the context is made clear, and also where she quotes Gog and Magog. As we see, it is concerning the end of the millennium, but we saw also that there could be references to before the second coming of Jesus. But here Ellen White quotes it clearly at the end, and she continues telling him, "You think that those who worship before the saints' feet," she mentions Revelation chapter 3 verse 9, "will at last be saved. Here I must differ with you, for God showed me that this class were professed Adventists who had fallen away and crucified to themselves the Son of God afresh, and put him to an open shame, and in the hour of temptation, which is yet to come, to show out every one's true character, they will know that they are forever lost, and overwhelmed with anguish of spirit, they will bow at the saints' feet." Interesting, right? So who are those that will bow to Christ's feet? To the saints? Those who were professed Adventists, that have not stayed firm in the truth to the end. You also think that Michael stood up and the time of trouble commenced in the spring of 1844. See this, hey? In the famous date of the great disappointment. The Lord has shown me in vision that Jesus rose up and shut the door and entered the Holy of Holies at the 7th month of 1844. But Michael standing up, as in Daniel 12, verse 1, to deliver his people, is in the future. Evidently, this was in the future for Jesus' second coming. Therefore, notice that there were reinterpretations of what was happening or what happened in 1844. And Ellen White clears out, saying, no, it is not like you say, it is not like this. This will not take place until Jesus has finished his priestly office in the heavenly sanctuary, and lays off his priestly attire, and puts on the most kingly robes and crown, to ride forth on the cloudly chariot, to thresh the heathen in anger and deliver his people. Now, how interesting the expression that she uses here. She talks about the moment that Christ finishes his office in the heavenly sanctuary, in the most holy place, where he is since 1844, when he passed from the holy place to the most holy. The investigative judgment begins over everyone since Adam to the last one that has died before the returning of Christ, of all of God's people, of all history. And remember that also in this judgment are the 144,000, those that are left alive. And at the end, what happens? He lays off his vestments of high priest. He has finished his priestly office in the heavenly sanctuary. He puts on his most kingly robes and crown, and that is when he comes for all of those that are saved of all the ages, and also the 144,000 living and sealed. But see the expression that she uses, to ride forth on the cloudy chariot. How interesting, eh? Here she does not say that he only comes on a cloudy chariot, meaning something that carries him, and, of course, you can already imagine, if the heavens are left empty, without angels, what does that mean? That they are all coming. Can you imagine the immensity of what is being described here? But he has his own cloudy chariot. Yes, because the angels will also be coming in something as well. I don't know if we really imagine this scene yet. And it also says to thresh the heathen in anger and deliver his people, evidently to finish with everything, and frees his people, those that will be persecuted to death in those times, those that will be in dungeons, in martyrdom. Then Jesus will have the sharp sickle in his hand, Revelation 14:14, and then the saints will cry day and night to Jesus on the cloud, to thrust in his sharp sickle and reap. Yes, they will be crying for them to finally be freed, to Jesus in the cloud, in that cloudy chariot, in that ship. This will be the time of Jacob's trouble, as in Jeremiah chapter 30 verses 5 to 8, out of which the saints will be delivered by the voice of God. See how beautiful it is to see when the biblical texts that are all referring to the same thing are put together and tuned in a correlation showing how everything is going to happen. It is beautiful, because everything remains crystal clear. Now she finishes with this: I believe the sanctuary to be cleansed at the end of the 2300 days is the New Jerusalem temple, of which Christ is a minister. Interesting, hey? The Lord showed me in vision more than 1 year ago that Brother Crozier had the true light on the cleansing of the sanctuary, and that it was his will that Brother Crozier should write out the view which he gave us in the Day Star Extra, February 7th, 1846. This was a post. I feel fully authorized by the Lord to recommend that extra to every saint. This extra she means to that precise number of the post. I pray that these lines may prove a blessing to you and all the clear children who may read them. And she signs Ellen White. Well, as you see, the sanctuary purified at the end of the 2300 days. Once more, it was not the second coming of Jesus, but the cleansing of the sanctuary in 1844, as we have already explained this in the Bible studies. Therefore you see in which context she wrote about Gog and Magog, which is the part that we are interested in. But we have shown the whole context so you can appreciate how clear it is related to all of this. Let's go on. We are going to go down to the section number 5 to see something different. It is a writing, and the title is Ellen G. White and Her Critics, written by Francis D. Nichol, page 584, paragraph 3. And it talks about Gog and Magog. Let's see what it says. It is also extracted from the book A Word to the Little Flock, and it is in the section named The Judgment. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Well, this is a famous Bible text, and see how it is described here. This scripture evidently points out the most important events of the Day of Judgment. That day will be 1,000 years long. The event which will introduce the Judgment Day will be the coming of the Son of Man, to raise the sleeping saints and to change those that are alive at that time, meaning to transform them. The second event will be the King's sitting upon the throne of his glory. The King will not sit upon the throne of his glory until those who have followed him are raised and sit upon the thrones of judgment with him, as in the text of Matthew chapter 19 verse 28. John saw in vision the length of time that Christ and the saints would sit on the thrones of judgment, and has written, And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them, and I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. This is the text of Revelation 24. The third event will be the gathering of all nations before the King, in their separate places. All nations cannot be thus gathered until the end of the 1,000 years, when the wicked dead will be raised and gathered up around the holy city. The saints will then be in the city, and the wicked outside of it. This is meaning once to the left and once to the right, so you can understand me. All nations will then be before him. Do we realize when this is happening? It is interesting, right? And now here it talks about Gog and Magog. The fourth event will be the delivering of the sentence by the King. His sentence upon the whole host of Gog and Magog will be, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels, as in Matthew 25, verse 41. If this is not the final sentence of the judgment on the wicked, I think we shall not find it in the Bible. Therefore the wicked are not sentenced before Christ comes, but they will hear their sentence after they are raised, at the close of the 1,000 years. Yes, in that resurrection, when they will want to attack the New Jerusalem, their sentence will be clear. The judgment has already been done on them, of course. Their sentence is already decided, and then the sentence is applied on them directly, the execution. It is not necessary that the final sentence should be given before the first resurrection, as some have taught. For the names of the saints are written in heaven, and Jesus and the angels will certainly know who to raise and gather to the New Jerusalem. The fifth event will be the execution of the final judgment. Some have taken the ground that the 1,000 years will be taken up in executing the judgment on the wicked. But this cannot be, for the man of sin is to be destroyed with the brightness of Christ's second coming. Therefore the wicked are to remain silent in the dust all through the 1,000 years, so meaning they are dead. How can the judgment be executed on the wicked before they are raised? It is certainly impossible. John saw the wicked all raised and gathered up around the camp of the saints at the end of the 1,000 years. He also saw fire come down from God out of heaven, which devoured them. This will be the execution of the final judgment on all the wicked. God executed his judgments on the wicked in the days of Lot and Noah, and that's the destruction of Jerusalem, and will execute his judgments on the living wicked as the pouring out of the 7 last plagues. But the pouring out of all these judgments cannot be the final execution of the judgment. That will be at the second death. Then God will make all things new. Then shall the King say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Matthew 25:34. Then God will have a clear universe, for the devil and his angels and all the wicked will be burnt up, root and branch. And who wrote this? This was written by James White, Ellen White's husband, with a compelling logic. So, is it clear to us the concept of what is going to happen? More clearly impossible, right? Now we are going to go down to point 6, that is the gift of prophecy, page 33, paragraph 3, by Dr. Alberto Tim and Dwayne Esmond, quoting also, of course, Gog and Magog. The conditionality of the prophetic voice. It talks about various principles, but we are going to go to the 4th one, which mentions Gog and Magog. This is now a commentary. This is not written by Ellen White or her husband. Prophecy is conditional when it is stated in the setting of a covenant. A covenant contains the elements of conditionality. Fitting examples of such covenant conditional prophecies are those in relation to the restoration of Israel, like creation of the New Jerusalem in the setting of the new heavens and the new earth, mentioned in Isaiah 65, verses 17 to 25. The Gog and Magog prophecy, that is in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, rebuilding of the Ezekiel's temple, appearing in Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48, and the establishment of God's kingdom according to Zechariah chapter 14. Yes, because this is worth to comment on. It talks about Gog and Magog, and it talks about the rebuilding of the temple, and afterwards the establishment of God's kingdom. All of this, could it be produced here on earth? Well, this in part is what will be, and in part is what cannot be, as we have already been commenting. And still we have to talk much deeper on this topic. At the moment I'll just leave here this detail. Okay, now let's go to point number 9, because the rest of them more or less talk about the same thing, of what we are going to see right here. The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, Book 5, page 84, paragraph 1, by Alfred Edoshim. And when he quotes Gog and Magog, he says, here in chapter 6, the evening of the third day in Passion Week. Keeping in mind, then, that the disciples could not have conjoined the desolation of the temple with the immediate advent of Christ into his kingdom and the end of the world, their question to Christ was twofold. When would these things be, and what would be the signs of his royal advent and the consummation of the age? On the former the Lord gave no information. To the latter, his discourse on the Mount of Olives was directed. On one point, the statements of the Lord had been so novel as almost to account for their question. Jewish writings speak very frequently of the so-called sorrows of the Messiah, Chabli shel Mashiach. These were partly those of the Messiah, and partly, perhaps chiefly, those coming of the Messiah. There can be no purpose in describing them in detail, since the particulars mentioned vary so much, and the descriptions are so fanciful. But they may generally be characterized as marking a period of internal corruption, and of outward distress, especially of famine and war, of which land of Palestine was to be the scene, and in which Israel were to be the chief sufferers. As the rabbinic notices which we possess all date from after the destruction of Jerusalem, it is of course impossible to make any absolute assertion on the point, but as a matter of fact none of them refers to desolation of the city and temple as one of the signs or sorrows of the Messiah. It is true that isolated voices proclaimed that fate of the sanctuary, but not in any connection with the triumphant advent of Messiah, and, if we are to judge from the hope entertained by the fanatics during the last siege of Jerusalem, they rather expected a divine, not doubt messianic, interposition to save the city and temple, even at the last moment. When Christ therefore proclaimed the desolation of the house, and even placed it in indirect connection with his advent, he taught that which must have been alike new and unexpected. This may be the most suitable place for explaining the Jewish expectation connected with the advent of the Messiah. Here we have first to dismiss, as belonging to a later period, the rabbinic fiction of two Messiahs, the one the primary and reigning, the son of David, the other the secondary and warfaring Messiah, the son of Ephraim or of Manasseh. The earliest Talmudic reference to this second Messiah dates from the 3rd century of our era, and contains the strange and almost blasphemous notices that the prophecy of Zechariah concerning the mourning for him whom they had pierced referred to Messiah the son of Joseph, who would be killed in the war of Gog and Magog, and that when Messiah the son of David saw it, he asked life of God, who gave it to him, as it is written in Psalm 2, "Ask of me, and I will give thee," upon which God informed the Messiah that his father David had already asked and obtained this for him, according to Psalm 21:4. See that here they are telling us an explanation that is given by Jews from the 3rd century, where they talk about even two different Messiah, hey? All of this so as to not accept what they should accept, which is Jesus as the authentic Messiah. And they make up these sort of things that do not fit anywhere. Generally, the Messiah, son of Joseph, is connected with the gathering and restoration of the 10 tribes. Later rabbinic writings connect all the sufferings of the Messiah for sin with this son of Joseph. The war in which the son of Joseph succumbed will finally be brought to a victorious termination by the son of David, when the supremacy of Israel would be restored and all nations walk in his light. It is scarcely matter for surprise that the various notices about the Messiah, son of Joseph, are confused and sometimes inconsistent, considering the circumstances in which this dogma originated. Its primary reason was no doubt controversial. When hardly pressed by Christian arguments about the Old Testament prophecies of the sufferings of the Messiah, The fiction about the son of Joseph as distinct from the son of David would offer a welcome means of escape. Besides, when in the Jewish rebellion, under the false Messiah Bar Kokhba, the son of a star, the latter succumbed to the Romans and was killed, the synagogue deemed it necessary to rekindle Israel's hope that had been quenched in blood by the picture to two messiahs, of whom the first should fall in warfare, while the second, the son of David, would carry the contest to a triumphant issue. You can see the explanations that they give, all because of not wanting to accept Jesus Christ. Quite some inventions they had to do. This is interesting because these are Adventist pioneers describing the history of Jewish beliefs. Well, now we have seen how they wrote about Gog and Magog under those terms, and now we are going to go to point 10. The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, Book 5, page 88, paragraph 1, also by Alfred Edersheim. In chapter 6, the evening of the third day in Passion Week, we have now reached the period of the coming age, the Athidlapo, or Saeculum Futurum. All the resistance to God will be concentrated in the great war of Gog and Magog, and with it the prevalence of all the wickedness be conjoined, and terrible would be the straits of Israel. 3 times would the enemy seek to storm the holy city, but each time would the assault be repelled, at the last with complete destruction of the enemy. The sacred city would now be wholly rebuilt and inhabited, but oh, how different from of old! Its Sabbath boundaries would be strewed with pearls and precious gems. The city itself would be lifted to a height of some 9 miles, nay, with realistic application of Isaiah 49:20. It would reach up to the throne of God, while it would extend from Joppa as the gates of Damascus. For Jerusalem was to be the dwelling place of Israel, and the resort of all nations. But more glorious in Jerusalem would be the new temple, which the Messiah was to rear, and to which those 5 things were to be restored, which had been wanting in the former sanctuary: the golden candlestick, the ark, and heaven-lit fire on the altar, the Holy Ghost, and the cherubim. And the land of Israel would then be as wide as it had been sketched in the promise which God had given to Abraham, and which had never before been fulfilled, since the largest extent of Israel's rule had only been over 7 nations, whereas the divine promise extended it over 10, if not over the whole earth. Well, here you see these were explanations that were given, and always in the context of Gog and Magog. And here it talks about how the extent of Israel's rule had only been over 7 nations, whereas it would be over 10, and if not over the whole earth. And now in point 12 we are going to see if we can clear out this concept. In the Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, appendix, page 9, paragraph 1, also from Alfred Edersheim, of course. And it says this: the Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, appendix 2, Philo of Alexandria and Rabbinic Theology. Then there was gematria, by which every letter in a word was resolved into its arithmetical equivalent. Thus the 2 words Gog and Magog equals 70, which was the supposed number of all the heathen nations. How interesting, hey? The gematria, which we have used it for the Vicarius Filii Dei, which gives 666. And not only this is in Latin or in Greek, it can also be done in Hebrew. None of these languages had numbers. Their letters had numerical matching. And look at that, Gog and Magog equals 70, which was the supposed number of all the heathen nations. And what happens to them? You know, they are destroyed. Everything that is not God's people is destroyed at the end. Therefore, see how there are different explanations given from different periods. Also, the Adventist pioneers wrote about what the Jews believed in, and also, in this case, gives a very interesting explanation, in this case about gematria. The prophecies, in the manner that they applied them, could not fit, But logically, when we have already understood what is going to happen at the end of times with Gog and Magog, logically it is that the heathen nations are destroyed. And once more, we repeat ourselves, evidently yes, after the millennium it refers to the whole world. But it also has a reference, and we will see it even more, that before the second coming of Christ there is an application of Gog and Magog. If we have already seen things, well, it is not enough, and we will see more. We finish here today at this point, and we will continue showing more points on the topic. And I warn you that the following ones that we're going to show, I know that especially to our brother Angel, that has presented various things that have to do with what we are going to see in the next conference, is going to be quite perplexed. And all of us, especially if we have seen what, thanks to God, has been presented referring to Elijah, plus what I myself have presented, and our brother Javi and Fanny, etc., etc., you are going to see that we are going to be more than surprised. Elijah in relation to Gog and Magog? Well, this is what we are going to see soon. Certainly none of it will be wasted. Maranatha 2031. God bless you.